Filipino Missionaries from the Neo-Catechumenal Way by Father Aristotle D. S.J. and Mr. Gilbert Son. Good day to all of you. That is Mr. Gilbert Son and I am Father Ari D. And we are here to talk to you about the Neo-Catechumenal Way as it has developed in the Philippines. The context is, of course, the 500th anniversary of the arrival of Christianity in the Philippines, the arrival of the Spanish. And in the church, this is being marked with the theme, Gifted to Give, a time to recall the Spanish legacy, especially the legacy of the Spanish church in the Philippines, seeing all of this as gifts and as graces, so that we are in turn in a position to give back and to give to others. Maybe the best illustration of that is the fact that today, 500 years after Christianity arrived in the Philippines, the papal nuncio to Spain is now a Filipino, Archbishop Bernardito Auza, shown here presenting his credentials to King Felipe in early 2020. So that's a way of seeing how things have come full circle. The Filipinos who were evangelized by the Spain have now sent a papal nuncio back to the country that gave us the faith. So what is the Neo-Catechumenal Way that we would like to share with you? My co-author Gilbert has been a pioneering member of the Neo-Catechumenal Way since it began in the Philippines around 1975. The church, of course, has been present in the Philippines for 500 years. And for much of that time, the leadership has been held by first the Spanish, and then after more than 300 years, the Americans. And after the Second Vatican Council, more and more there was localization. So as more Filipino clergy and sisters were formed, they were also sent abroad to go on mission themselves. But something new that came with the Second Vatican Council is that new forms of mission emerged in the church. It's no longer just priests and religious who are being sent out to go on mission, but lay people as well. So one of the movements that came out of the Second Vatican Council is the Neo-Catechumenal Way. This belongs to a group of other so-called new religious movements, largely led by lay people. You can think of groups like the Focolare or the Opus Dei, which has a very strong lay component. In the picture, you see the two lay founders of the Neo-Catechumenal Way in Spain, Kiko Arguello and Carmen Hernandez. Kiko was already a nationally recognized painter and artist in Spain in the 1960s, when he felt an existential crisis. He had been brought up Catholic, but he felt that it was not providing him with enough meaning, and he sought to renew himself and rediscover his Catholic faith. And he was convinced that he would find God in the slums. So he went to live in the slums of Madrid, and that is also where he met Carmen Hernandez, herself a seeker, somebody who had been in the Holy Land, somebody who had explored religious life. Together, they designed a new program of adult formation for Catholics. You see, for Catholics, the catechumenate is what you call the period of preparation for baptism, especially for adults, right? So you go through a program of formation, of preparation, and then you're baptized. This movement is called the Neo-Catechumenal Way because you go through the same preparation again as an adult, even if you've been Catholic for all your life. And this is meant to inspire a more active living out of your Christian faith in your daily life. So that is the vision of the Neo-Catechumenal Way. And the model for this way, for this spirituality, is the Holy Family. Living together, finding sanctity within the family, growing in wisdom and age and grace as a family. And this will be very important to remember in understanding the mission of the Neo-Catechumenal Way. The way or the movement operates wherever the local bishop welcomes them. So that is a characteristic. No, they don't just go around implanting themselves. They need to be welcomed by the local bishop. But since the mid 1960s, there has been a lot of growth worldwide, so that today it is present in 134 countries with 21,300 communities, 6,270 parishes, 1,688 families on mission, and 125 seminaries. So how does it happen? How does it grow? Well, in the Neo-Catechumenal way, there are so-called charisms, different charisms. First of all, when you form a community, you need catechists, people who study, people who train, and are in turn the ones who teach in different small communities. This, I would say, is the backbone of the Neo-Catechumenal way, people who become the teachers. And these are not priests or religious, but lay people. And then you have itinerants. You go on mission by sharing the message, this vision of the Holy Family, spirituality being lived out in ordinary Catholic families. And you send out that message when you become an itinerant. When the catechist is sent to go to other places, still supported by the original community, but going now to other places to share this model of spirituality, of discipleship. And then you have itinerant priests, priests who may belong to their own dioceses or religious congregations, but are given permission to work with the Neo-Catechumenal way for a fixed period of time. And they go also go on itinerancy to go on mission together with lay Catholics, very, very often families. And then you have the families on mission since 1985, when the founders, Kiko Arguello and Carmen Hernandez, offered to Pope John Paul II this model of sending families on mission to places where the faith needs to be enlivened or transplanted, especially in Europe, where the traditional culture may be Catholic, but the practice is no longer there. No? So families that are sent there to live the faith, to be witnesses to living out of the faith in modern times. Later on, this was expanded to what is called missio ad gentes, no? Which is also to send out families, but this time in a group of families with single people, with a priest, and to live in non-Christian environments, again, as a form of witnessing and sharing the story of Jesus as the occasion arises, as the opportunity arises. So these are the different, in a nutshell, the different charisms or the structure followed by the Neo-Catechumenal way for it to be able to form communities in all kinds of places. Now, how did the Neo-Catechumenal way come to the Philippines? It happened in 1975, and again, because of the link to Spain. Of course, this is long after the period of Spanish colonization in the Philippines, but the links with Spain were never broken. There were always priests and religious who continued being in the country, serving in the country as holdovers of their own religious congregations, or later on, you have exiles from other missions like China. So the Spanish continued serving in the Philippines. For example, the Dominican fathers, they continue to have the Holy Rosary province of Spain operating in the Philippines even up to the present day. So in 1975, an itinerant team of the Neo-Catechumenal way arrived from Spain, and the priest accompanying them was a Jesuit. So he looked for a Jesuit connection. He went to the Spanish parish priest of Mary the Queen Parish in San Juan, Father Juan Andechaga, who was very receptive. And that is where the first community of the Neo-Catechumenal way was formed in the Philippines. And from that group to which Gilbert's son belongs, they began to send, following that model I described earlier, catechists to other dioceses, so that today they are present in the country in 52 dioceses, 312 parishes. They have created 794 communities, and they have as many as 3,200 catechists. So it has grown a lot. And in 2014, they had a big convocation, what they call a convivence, a gathering with 15,000 people attending, and Cardinal Tagle was there guest speaker. The founder came, Kiko Arguello, and there was a call to mission issued by Cardinal Tagle. He said, there are so many Catholics in the Philippines, we should be going out and sharing the faith with others. So there was a call for volunteers, and following the method of the Neo-Catechumenal way, they just asked people to volunteer. At that gathering, who feels called to be sent on mission, either individuals or families, and hundreds stood up. Of course, you do not automatically send them all out. The next 2 years were a period of discernment and training to choose who is appropriate to send out. So after this whole process, there are at least 13 families from the Philippines that have been sent out on mission. And let me describe to you 3 of them serving now in different contexts to give you a flavor of what kind of missionary work they are doing, which I think is quite different from what priests and religious do when they start a mission. When priests and religious start a mission, the traditional way is you organize the community, you establish a mission station, then a parish, perhaps a school, you build up institutions. It's that level, that large, big level of organization. But this is not the way of the Neo-Catechumenate community. They work very quietly, inserting themselves in communities. Of course, I cannot reveal their real identities. But in Vietnam, there is Henry, who is 48 years old and has already 5 kids. He and his wife have been walking in the Neo-Catechumenal way for 30 years. And in 2014, following that big gathering with Cardinal Tagle, they stood up and volunteered to go on mission. So they went to Vietnam in 2017. At that time, Henry already had a very stable job working for 20 years in the government. And he was about to be promoted 2 notches higher in his department. And yet he gave that up. He uprooted his entire family to go to Vietnam, not knowing what they were going to do there. No? Imagine 5 children that had to be placed in school. In fact, when they got to Vietnam, they had to be demoted 2 years because they couldn't afford an international school. They hardly spoke the language. So you can imagine the struggle with the language, with the food, with finding housing, with finding employment. And in fact, Henry just does odd jobs, including as an English tutor to make ends meet. The beauty of the structure in the Neo-Catechumenal way is that you always still belong to your original community. So when times were hard for Henry and his family, his community back in the Philippines would send support just to cover their basic necessities. And that is how Henry has lived in Vietnam with his family for several years now. Eventually, the bishop of their place heard about them, invited them to preach, to share their story in the diocese, and now they have 2 small communities in their place in Vietnam. And they have continued there even during the pandemic. Another story in Cambodia, another part of Southeast Asia, you have Dong, who is 55 years old. He has 4 kids, and for the past 6 years has also been in Cambodia on mission. And the model with him is that theirs is not the only family serving there. They are with other families, a Korean family, an Italian priest, people from Poland, Lebanon, Korea, Madagascar. They form a Christian community living and working and witnessing in a Buddhist country, in a non-Christian context. No? And Dong also had a stable government job back in the Philippines, working also in insurance, working as a carpenter. But he uproots himself, brings his family to Cambodia. And just as they arrived at the airport, after all that work in the paperwork, getting their visas, they were not being allowed entry. And he was in such despair because they thought, we uprooted ourselves, left everything, and now what? But by the grace of God, another immigration officer appeared while he was waiting, and he was made to fill out a form. And in short, something happened and they were allowed entry. Again, the same struggles. How do you find a job? How do you find a proper house? How do you put the children in school? Eventually, despite not having a college degree, he and his wife found work as teachers in the Cambodian educational system. And the way they do mission is simply to befriend all their neighbors, their fellow parents in the school, their co-workers, sharing about their faith. And that is it. It is really quiet Christian witnessing modeled after the life of the Holy Family. And they have been there for 6 years and they continue serving there even during the pandemic. Finally, we have the story of Howard and Tin, who are already in their 50s, who have 6 kids. They are a Chinese Filipino family from Iloilo, 28 years in the Neo-Catechumenal way, quite well established in the city. You know, Howard has a job as in construction, as a contractor, architect, very comfortable life. And yet, when they were first called to go on itinerancy, they accepted the challenge. They went first to Calibo, no, in around 2006. And after a period of time doing that kind, they felt it wasn't so difficult because it's just a few hours from Iloilo. But later, the responsible team or the organization of the Neo-Catechumenate in the Philippines invited them to go to China. And that was a big change, no? Because by that time, they already had 5 children, one born during the Calibo mission. And in China, it's a communist country. Foreigners cannot be openly evangelizing. But they established themselves there, and they would go out into the streets telling people about who they were, their faith, and people would take interest because they had a big family, 5 kids, very unusual in China. And with that as an entry point, they told their story. And they stayed there for a number of years. Later on, they were invited to go to Canada to do the same thing, to be a family on mission. And while it is a first world country, they had the same difficulties. How do you find employment? Howard was doing odd jobs with great irony because he was so well established in Iloilo, and yet here he was doing odd jobs to survive. So these 3 families or 3 examples of mission in foreign countries, it's very different from what you think of when you consider missionary work. No big institutions, but quiet witnessing in the ordinariness of daily life. And all of this has come because of the Spanish legacy in the Philippines. The links established 500 years ago are still there. A new form of mission was introduced to us, the Neo-Catechumenal way. And now we are the ones sending missionaries abroad and doing a different kind of mission work, which I think sets the direction for the future of the church, because this is all being done by lay people. So by sharing the story of the Neo-Catechumenate in the Philippines and the missionaries that have been sent abroad, Gilbert and I would like to highlight the value of lay witnessing. People are very receptive to their message because they are fellow lay people living ordinary lives. They are not people with big degrees and big accomplishments, setting up big institutions, but ordinary people sharing with other ordinary people. From a worldly perspective, you wonder, I'm sure there are people will ask, what's the value of all this? But that is precisely the contribution of the Neo-Catechumenate way, to implant themselves in society, in the family, and by doing so, by living a Christian life, sharing the gospel with others. And we dare say this is probably the future of the church, not only in the Philippines, but throughout the world, to rely not so much on the work of clergy and religious, but on the distinct contribution and spirituality of lay people. Thank you very much.